I am here with Teri Ashley, who I've asked to have a conversation with me. Teri is a member at Foothills and is someone who has done a lot of reflecting on the end of life and on human mortality. And then along the way in those conversations, her husband Joe became ill and was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And then she continued her reflections on death and dying with Joe through his journey as he died. You know, for somebody that's entirely new to lifting this veil, someone who's been very well practiced at keeping their eyes on immortality, on not thinking about their own or their loved ones' end of their life. Where would you invite them to begin?
When I look at the grieving part of all that, I was completely unprepared for that, even though I imagined my own death and what I wanted that to look like. I had no idea how deep and profound and painful and disorienting grief would be for me. It has been the most spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally challenging thing I've ever dealt with in my life by far. But there are strategies and there are ways to handle it or cope with it that I would love to share with you. The first thing I would want to tell people is that it is incredibly disorienting. You don't know from one day to the next how you're going to feel. There are so many things that are thrown up in the air, so much like this current crisis with COVID-19. You're worried about what tomorrow will look like. You're worried about finances and your work and how you're going to show up in the world, because you don't know from one day to the next how you're going to feel. It's exhausting. There's so much anxiety because there's so much that's unknown, so much uncertainty. The number one epiphany I had when I learned that Joe was dying was that I needed to tell the truth about my experience, whatever that was going to be, knowing that that was going to be off-putting for some people. I also knew that if I didn't tell the truth, it would make me crazy. I don't know how I would have survived it. So that's the number one thing. And that sometimes means you're going to have to talk to somebody other than the person that you normally talk to, because we wear each other out sometimes. Like, choose your audience, because sometimes you have to let the F-bomb drop 12 times in a day and somebody can't take it that much, you know? But you have to speak your truth about how this is feeling and what's going on in your head and how scared you are and how uncertain you are. And sometimes you're going to have to say it until you just can't even stand to hear yourself say it anymore. But it takes what it takes. So being okay with that is important. I made a menu of self-care strategies that I had posted on the wall, and what I know is that some of them work for a while and then they don't work, and then you come back to them and they do, or you have to modify them. But I've kept a running list for 2 years of radical self-care, everything from meditation, which is my one non-negotiable, to journaling, reading inspirational passages, taking a hot bath, going for a walk, taking a nap. Oh my gosh, grief is so exhausting. So exhausting. Phoning a friend, taking time to be quiet. The list just goes on, and it's important to keep one handy, because cognitively, you're just not going to be on top of your game. It's not possible with all that's going on inside emotionally and all the rewiring. I think about why grief is so exhausting. All the relationships or the strategies or the ways we were in the world yesterday or 2 weeks ago are not there anymore. And we've got to rewire all of our thinking. We have to change how we relate to people. There's so many things that have to change in the framework of our brain, that of course it's going to be exhausting. So giving ourselves permission to take naps, or just lowering our expectations of ourselves so that we're not continually frustrated. So many of these emotions we are painful. We don't really want to be having them. And we certainly don't want to be having them again. For crying out loud, I did this yesterday and last week and last month. And here I am doing that anger thing again, or I'm feeling really depressed again. Like, can't I be done with this? That at some point, if we're not really gentle with ourselves, if we're not practicing self-compassion, I found that I was blaming myself for not grieving better, for not just figuring out how to do this better and getting this darn grief thing over with, for crying out loud. And it's the resistance to the emotions that I'm having that is the most painful thing. Resisting it amplifies how much it hurts. So if I can drop the resistance and just lean into feeling really sad today, or feeling really confused, I move through it more quickly than I would if I were fighting it. With emotions around grief in particular, the anger, the denial, the bargaining, all those things, it helps to just name it. What is it that I'm doing today? And I had one of those days just a few days ago, and it's like I woke up and I was in such a funk. 5 o'clock till 10 o'clock that morning, I was just in a funk. But I noticed that I got busy and got doing some things, and it passed. So I made a note, yeah, I was in a really bad funk, but it only lasted for 4 hours, and then something else moved in. It's really helpful to notice patterns.
All right, Teri. Well, thank you so much for the time
Mm-hmm.
and for the conversation and for sharing some of your wisdom. I hope we can come back to more of this conversation at some point. Check back in.